Welcome to this conversation in our ongoing series on the effects of the various actions of the current administration on issues the church is concerned with. My special guest today, I want to go ahead and introduce. She is Danielle Mutone-Smith, a PhD. She is recently the Director for Federal Government Relations at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. She previously served at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, for 13 years, most recently as the Deputy Assistant to the Administrator and Managing Director for USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Prior to that, she served as Division Chief for the Policy, Partnership, Program, and Communications Division in USAID's Office of Food for Peace. She also previously worked in USAID's Bureau for Legislative and Public Affairs, where, among other initiatives, she led legislative efforts around food aid reform. Before joining USAID, Danielle served as Director of Global Trade and Agricultural Policy at Women Thrive Worldwide and the advocacy organization Bread for the World, where she strengthened NGO anti-hunger coalition efforts and served as the chair for the Interaction Agriculture and Food Security Working Group. Danielle began her career working with the Farmer to Farmer program at Partners of the Americas, where she engaged with farmer groups throughout Central America and Haiti to build food security and strengthen the livelihood opportunities. Danielle earned her PhD in public policy from George Mason University, where she focused on international policy and wrote on U.S. food aid reform, and received both a master's degree in international development and a BA in economics and international studies next door at American University. Now, after hearing that, I have to say, one of the great joys of my coming to Washington so many years ago is to meet the amazing people like Danielle, the inside the Beltway experts on how we're making our world a better place. And so I'm just so very pleased that she can be with us today. Danielle, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, I want to make good use of your time and jump right in to the issue that has caught so much of our attention. Although I must say, I wish it had caught more of our attention. It seems every day something new comes out for us to be distracted from, but the actions that happened earlier this year, I think, are profound, and those are the ones I want to explore with you. Early in the Trump administration, he moved to make massive cuts to foreign aid, especially to reduce drastically the funding for USAID, and also launched an effort to eliminate the agency entirely. We are recording this on September 5th. Yesterday, a federal judge blocked some of those cuts. But I want to ask you, what has already happened? Can you describe the scope of the damage to the agency itself?
Yeah, I mean, the scope is the agency doesn't exist anymore as it once was. 9/2 or September 2nd was really the last day that USAID staff were in any way kind of fulfilling roles within the agency. And really July 1st was the last day that any programs existed at USAID and any program staff really existed at USAID. Then the transition to the State Department happened, where some limited programs were moved, some limited staff were moved, and then the remaining staff between July 1st and September 1st were folks who were helping with kind of closeout. A lot of HR actions, a lot of grant closures, backdoor process shifts between the agencies and kind of shutdown of real estate and those sort of things, and more at the administrative side of the work. So really, at this point in time, the agency as it once was, the institution is gone. both here in Washington and around the world. So all the missions overseas have been closed. The staff, both kind of US citizen staff who were serving as foreign service officers overseas or who were in personal service contractor positions, foreign service nationals, so people who were from those countries working with us in the missions, have all been disbanded. Again, with a few that may have been held by embassies to help with some of the transition work. So really at this point in time, kind of then there have been different court decisions along the way that have tried to stop and start different aspects of this. At this point in time, there really is no agency left. So in terms of kind of what would happen with funding or any kind of orders to move programs forward would have to be done through the State Department.
The rationale for these cuts has been to reduce what's been termed massive waste, fraud, and abuse. Is there any basis for this characterization?
I would say no. No institution is perfect. Every institution around the world, anything that we make ourselves is going to have issues and problems. But USAID as a whole always had a very strong track record against waste, fraud, and abuse. I think the individuals themselves were there out of an inherent sense of purpose. They wanted to use American taxpayer dollars as efficiently and effectively as possible to help people in need. The more we could stretch a dollar, the more we could do with it. And so we were really, really focused on making sure that we were using foreign aid dollars the best we could. We had very robust oversight and accountability measures. Our awards had very strong oversight and accountability measures. We had vetting programs in place that are much stronger than you'll see pretty much in any other donor or State Department have as well. We made sure that the money was reaching those who it was intended to. And when we found places where it wasn't, we took measures immediately to try to correct that. We had an inspector general who was always kind of looking at different aspects of programming, looking at ways to improve oversight and accountability measures. We had many government accountability office audits and investigations that looked at how US dollars were being spent. And I think that really kind of showed that there weren't big glaring issues that as kind of was deemed by the administration. I would also say that there were some accusations kind of along the way, I think in the abuse category, that some of the programs were being directed towards very liberal or leftist sort of programming. And what I would say to that is like the core of USAID and its programming was focused on poverty reduction, democracy programs, human rights, education, food assistance. Every administration comes in and has different priorities, and they can move programs in different directions. I worked under 4 different administrations. I saw many times where leadership would come in and they want to focus a little more on climate, or they want to focus a little more on diversity. And we saw that under the last administration. And so there were programs that it wasn't that they were abuse or that they were wasteful. They weren't priorities or they weren't deemed valuable by this administration, but categorized then as abuse. So I think that there was the rhetoric that kind of was out there that miscategorized a lot of what was being done. And just maybe one last point on this as well. Most of USAID's programs were subject to something called congressional notification. So when we were going to spend dollars, we would have to send up congressional notifications to let the authorizing and the appropriating committees of jurisdiction know what we were doing. So if we were going to start a democracy program in Colombia, let's say, they would get a notification that says, here's how much money and the type of program, the scope, the partner of what we're doing. Congress then has a review period by which they can come back to us and say, we don't think you should be doing that. We're putting a hold. We want more information, or just block it altogether. So there was always also an accountability with Congress that was there. And so during this process, I think one of the issues that we found most distressing was that many of the people that we worked with outside of the administration who had been kind of supporters and allies in the past didn't speak up for kind of the misrepresentation of USAID programs and people. And they knew very well what we were doing and how we were doing it. So I think if there had been massive problems, we would have known about that way sooner. And Trump was president before. I was in that administration as well. And this wasn't necessarily a big focus of what, what the first Trump administration was prioritizing.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you about the real effect on the ground. You described what's happened to the agency, and but I'm interested worldwide. What has been the effect of these cuts in both funds and personnel uh, around the world for the people that USAID has been serving?
Yeah, I mean it's very tangible in terms of the impacts. Most of the programs that we were funding are gone, right? We had global health programs focused on malaria, focused on vaccines, maternal and child health, all sorts of different types of health program. We had education programs focused on making sure that children and girls got access to education, human rights programs, democracy building programs that strengthen civil society, strengthen the capacity of elections. We had so many different types of programs that were really built to help countries along their development pathways, help people move out of poverty. And we have programs that, like I worked on, that address some of the most acute causes of emergency. So, in the shuttering of USAID and the pullback of so many awards and the termination of so many awards, very tangibly, we saw clinics that were serving children be closed. We had nutrition programs in Nigeria like shuttered. We had water irrigation projects in the Democratic Republic of the Congo be turned off. We had food aid programs in many countries, food assistance and nutrition programs terminated. So it has a very real impact on people's lives. For example, all the programs in Yemen were terminated without kind of prioritization on, is this serving acutely malnourished children or such. Yemen has over 2 million children who are in need of assistance, and those kids are now not going to continue getting the assistance from that we were providing. And I think that what we're most concerned about, and I think we were most concerned about throughout the last 7 months, was less even the impact on us as federal workers and as USAID staff, but more on who's going to be there at that end to help the people who are now not going to be receiving that food. We're seeing refugee rations, for example, in Kenya, be cut down to 30% of what they should be because the funding has been drying up. So that's going to have real direct impacts on people's lives, has real direct impacts on national security. It has, real direct impacts on the economies of the countries that we were trying to help. And so I think we will see a rise in conflict. We're going to see a rise in famine. We're going to see a rise in disease that could be prevented because USAID is no longer there. And there isn't kind of any entity that can fill that gap because we were such a big player. As much as outside donors and others want to come in and help, and that's going to be needed, the gap is going to be too big to fill to fill on its own. In terms of, I would just say on workers too, I mean, obviously, thousands of USAID workers have lost their jobs, both civil servants like myself, foreign service officers who had sacrificed years of their life serving the country overseas, representing kind of the best of America. Many who spend time away from family serving in dangerous places like Afghanistan or Sudan and couldn't bring their families with them, but opted to serve regardless on behalf of the US government. Many foreign service nationals who had good jobs with us who now are going to be unemployed, and the ripple effect out to many of our partners who are now also contracting as they see their funding resources go. So we're seeing many partners, NGO partners, start to lay off people as well. So the entire kind of sector is going to feel the pain of this, and so it has large ripple effects.
Is it, you will hear it said that people are now dying because of this. Is that an accurate statement? Is that too dramatic to say?
I think that people, if they haven't started dying, with there will be. um, there are definitely examples that we documented, our partners who are on the ground working with us have documented of children who have died because they did not get their malnutrition treatments, who did not get the medical treatment that they needed. There is no way that kind of in a few months from now, we're not going to see increases in famine in countries that really relied on food assistance from the United States to help fill those acute gaps. And that will lead to increased death. Famine, by definition, is basically a mortality level. And so, like that is going to really impact people on the ground. So it's hard to kind of measure. In a sweeping, we were in 70 countries around the world, kind of really to assess the damage at this point in time. But I have no doubt that we're going to see that increase in sickness and sadly kind of death because of these cuts down the road.
You kind of exist in two worlds, in that you've been involved in this amazing, I'm going to call it an industry of international humanitarian efforts in a variety of ways. But I know some of your personal backstory, so you also are deeply shaped by your Christian faith. And if you read your resume, first of all, you read your resume. I read your resume, and now that I'm 70, I think, boy, I wasted my life compared to her. That's just amazing what you've done.
Yeah.
And it reads like an amazing missionary service through the agency of governmental and non-governmental organizations. Can you speak about your call to ministry, what these postings have meant to you, and then also how the events of the last 6 months have affected you personally? Not your job, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, having work that I was passionate about, that was rooted in my faith system and my beliefs has always been really important. So really wanting to kind of help shape the world. I think I grew up in, a Catholic church with a big focus on social justice issues. Came to the Methodist Church, where there's a very heavy lean into mission work and service. And so that's always been a big part of my life, and really kind of believing in the gospel that kind of preaches about taking care of each other, and our neighbor is global. It's not just the person next to you, but whoever might be around the world who is in need of shelter and food, and that's our job. So I think I've always wanted to kind of focus my career on ways that I could do that and kind of use the talents and the gifts that I was given to help kind of work in that direction. And we all have different pieces of that. And I, tried to focus on policies and programs and how we can make that better. Kind of going back in time, like very early on, I lived in Argentina. I graduated high school there. And we went on a mission trip to Chaco, where we saw the indigenous who lived an incredibly different life than at that time, wealthy Buenos Aires, and had no clean water, had arsenic in their water, had no access to food. The schools were very limited. And I think in that very early time of like high school, really seeing that kind of incredible poverty and feeling like we could do something about it and we should do something about it. And coming back and really wanting to focus on that. So I've always tried to like focus on how I could use my time, my professional life to try to improve others' lives as much as possible. There's different points of time. I worked at Bread for the World, which is a faith-based um, advocacy organization, and part of my job was going to churches and talking to them about why it was important to raise your voice in advocacy and tell your members of Congress and your governor and others why they should value and fund foreign aid programs or domestic social safety net programs like SNAP. That was like a big part of what we did, and to use our voices as Christians in that role. And even where I've been in government, while it's there is that separation. it's always been kind of my goal has always been driven by wanting to be someone who can help provide assistance to those in need. So yeah, I definitely kind of have always felt that connection to my faith in my work, even if it wasn't apparent in what I was doing or kind of in the organization I was working with. It was what drove me underneath it all.
Well, I didn't know about Argentina. Why Argentina? Why were you
Oh,
there?
because my father worked for Nabisco at the time,
Oh,
and
really?
they moved us to Argentina where they had bought a company and were trying to build it up again. So we moved there when I was in high school, and we have obviously lots of poverty and our own challenges here in the United States. So it's not to discount those, but when I went there and kind of saw the depth of poverty, the real exclusion of whole populations of people, the neglect, it kind of struck a chord, really, in terms of feeling this very much imbalance and injustice that was going on.
You and I share something, and that is we are both married to pastors of substantial congregations in the Washington area. My wife, Dreama, was the pastor of the Fairlington United Methodist Church in Alexandria, and Matthew is the current pastor of the Centerville United Methodist Church. I think that means we have watched them as they've tried to lead congregations with diverse political commitments, maintaining pastoral relations and trying to figure out how to preach every Sunday. I think maybe it's easier for you and I in our different roles to speak prophetically at times where it may be harder for them. How do you view the role of the congregational pastor in moments I'm going to say extreme moments like this one?
I wonder if Matthew would agree with me. I mean, in the end, I feel like the congregational pastor is there to highlight what the gospel is telling us, right? Like what the Bible is telling us about the situation. And to me, I feel like we often make issues very Republican or Democrat. They become very political when really it's about humanity. And it's not necessarily always have to be politicized. Is this an issue that we're treating with mercy and grace, and that we're living out what we've been told to do, right? Like that's to me what it comes down to. And so reminding people of that grounding, helping them to find what they see in the gospel about kind of what we're seeing happen in society, what we're seeing like actions being taken. Is it right to cut off programs that help children in need around the world? Is that something that we feel good about? And I realize that these foreign aid programs are government funded programs. And so there are people who question whether or not it's the role of the United States to do it or not do it. But I would argue that, we are supposed to be inspired by our generosity. We've been given many blessings in this country. We want to take care of people here at home. We should also want to take care of our neighbors around the world. And that's what we were, trying to do. And so I think kind of reminding people of that grounding of what is it that we've been taught as Christians to do, and to look for that. It doesn't have to always be a right or a left. I worked under four administrations. There were things I disagreed with in each of them, and there were things I agreed with in each of them. Right? There were George Bush started PEPFAR, which supports children with AIDS around the world. He increased foreign assistance level than his predecessor, who was a Democratic administration. I worked under the Trump one administration and had very productive relationships and very good programs with under that administration as well. So it wasn't always it's not always a political challenge that I think we make it out to be. To me, it's kind of reminding, encouraging people to look around us and kind of use our faith as a guidepost as to whether or not something is feels right to us and feels like it's sitting with us well. And I think that's kind of the role of the pastor, is to kind of lead people to think about those issues deeply, inspire them to kind of go back to those roots and always question kind of what we're doing and how we're treating other people.
You make a really good point about this kind of international humanitarian efforts on a big scale have happened under both Democratic and Republican presidents. Um, and of course, you mentioned PEPFAR; it's out too. It's been canceled as well. Um, how I have a feeling that whatever party is in office next, um, what's been broken, what's been destroyed is not going to return anytime soon at anything like this level. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be very hard. We had 64 years of an agency that learned from itself, right? Like we had institutional knowledge that is now gone. We had infrastructure and investments that are now gone. There's a lot that's been lost, and it'll take a long time to try to rebuild that, if that's the intention of the next administration.
Well, then let's think about what could step into the breach. Denominations like the United Methodist Church, Roman Catholic Church, and many others have been involved in humanitarian relief and development efforts long before federal government efforts. But they don't come and never have come anywhere near the funding levels that we're talking about through the power of the federal government. Even though that funding is a small fraction of taxes, the amount is too huge. What are your thoughts about the role that Christians should play in the present, I'll call it crisis, as individuals, as members of congregations, and through organized denominational activity? Is this a time for um, us to step up?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think you said it long before we were involved as a government in some of these actions. The church was there, right, serving people who were vulnerable, who needed help. And I think it's probably needed more now than ever, both here at home and abroad. I think what USAID brought was we could work at large scale. Like we could address a food system, right? Like work with the government of Zimbabwe in terms of how they are planning their agricultural systems and irrigation and do things on a very large scale and provide technical assistance and capacity strengthening. But we also did a lot at the community level. And in the end, all that work was about how do we impact the child at the end, the family, the community. So any work at that large scale was to try to improve people's lives at the local level. And so I think for missionaries and church missions and groups like UMCOR, that's a lot of the focus, right? Is how do we improve communities? How do we improve families' lives? And so that work can continue. And even if we can't change things maybe at the large scale right now at the moment, there's still a lot that we can do at the individual level. And thinking about how we identify those people who are most neglected, most vulnerable, most exploited, and try to address those needs where they are. So it might just be a different approach than we can take when we have billions of dollars to kind of exercise. But there's still a lot that can be done, especially if we kind of focus in on where the need is the greatest. And I think that there's a lot of that already happens. And we just have to kind of maybe work even closely together. Sometimes I think like we get very siloed and very individual and kind of in how we're approaching things. If we can maybe pool our resources, pool our thinking, pool our planning even more, then we might be able to have even bigger impacts. I mean, at the end of the day, I think USA was different than a lot of other government agencies. Yes, we were, you know, government bureaucrats in a lot of ways and pushing paper and such. But I think in the end, like we were all there and we wanted to be there because we saw ourselves as helpers, right? Like we wanted to be the helpers. We were problem solvers. We were people who were willing to get in the trenches and go talk to people where they were and help figure out problems and solutions and bring assistance. And I think that's what the church is good at too, and has always been good at. And so they can continue to do that. And the other thing I'd also add is like one of the things that I think we take for granted with like the foreign service and people who would go overseas and meet with governments or meet with local churches who are helping us, because we worked with churches and community leaders and families, is we are representing the United States. And there's a lot of misinformation and such out there on America, right? And so we were bringing that spirit of generosity, that spirit of diplomacy with us along the way, and people got a better sense of who we were as Americans at the same time as we were kind of there delivering aid. And I think that's important for our country. It's important for our national security. It's important for us as people when we travel, but also just as human beings, right? Like making those human connections. And so where now those foreign service officers aren't, other people can go and represent kind of the best of what America brings too. So I think as people go out from churches and missions, they can also kind of carry that too. It's like, yes, you're there as a Christian, but you can also help represent the best of America and help to kind of share who we are as people as well.
Old enough to remember when the Peace Corps started. And I remember stories of people going into the smallest villages anywhere in the world and seeing on the wall of the house or the tent a picture of JFK. And then as this has been happening this year, my mind has gone to kind of some very specific locations where I saw bags marked USAID. So I think of, you mentioned Zimbabwe or the Yucatan Peninsula, or other places where we had that kind of presence. As you've thought about those who have been affected by what's happening, is there a specific location your mind has gone to that you visited?
Yeah, I mean, I there's so many places. I mean, I have been to Haiti many times, and Haiti is probably one of the hardest countries in the world to survive in and to work in for many reasons, from logistics to corrupt governments, and I have been shown the most generosity and hospitality by the poorest people in the world, and so that gets lost. Sorry,
Yeah.
in these stories of kind of shutdowns and federal workers and everything else, because there's a lot of people who also were very generous to us. I was thinking a lot actually about, I was in Kakuma, Kenya in December.
Mhm.
And I spent a lot of time visiting with farmers who were trying to, like, we were working with to improve their crop rotations and improve their productivity. They showed me the water pumps that we helped to build and the water collection systems that we helped to build, so they had fresh water and they didn't have to walk miles. I went to IDP camps in Ethiopia, where refugees and internally displaced people were that they were settled there and they were reliant on the support of the United States really to keep them fed and to keep them with shelter. And there's so many folks out there who now I do think about, like, oh, what is going to happen to that program? Like, that's been, I think, our greatest concern all along. The last 7 months were very traumatic for USAID overall. But at the end of the day, like, we were fighting every day just to try to protect as many programs as we could. Where there was the promise or perceived intent to move that program to the State Department to continue it, we would do whatever we could to try to make that happen, because we wanted to make sure that the people on the receiving end didn't feel like we had just forgotten them either. When I was in Kakuma, I was with the governor, and I went out and I met with so many community leaders, and I sat and talked to so many mothers who were telling me about the treatments that their children were getting, and they were finally seeing them overcome malnutrition and get healthy again. And you just think, like, I hope those people don't just feel like they've been, abandoned by us, because that was just very tangible, like, sitting and holding and talking to people and feeling like they had hope. We were bringing them hope in a sense, right? Like, we were helping to train the youth so they didn't feel like they had to engage in gang violence and gang activity, help them learn skills to make a living, and then also work on peace and conflict resolution programs. We are helping to bring hope to that community. Didn't necessarily cost a lot of money to help deliver that, and without that support, what happens to all those youth who are really counting on us for a brighter future? I worry about those folks and kind of where this leaves them now. So, yeah, I think it's something that definitely like haunts me every day in terms of the different places that I've been. I've been very blessed to have traveled so many different places and so many people I've met, and kind of where this now leaves them.
Well, maybe it's not fair to take that word hope and ask you, what do you hope for now? What is there a basis for hope?
Mhm. I mean, I do still have hope. I mean, I think earlier you asked too, like, how did this impact my spirituality or my faith? And I don't think this actually has. If anything, I still very strongly believe in what we were doing and how we were doing it and the impact that it has, and the why behind what we were doing it, right? At least for myself. Um, I have hope that others do step up to fill those gaps, whether it is churches, individual organizations, the billionaires out there who have resources to share, host country governments who maybe think about reprioritizing their spending to help make sure that the vulnerable people don't fall through the cracks. Other donors hope that those gaps are filled, and that people don't kind of fall through the cracks, and we don't see an increase in exploitation and poverty and hunger over the next few years. So that's something I do really hope for, is that others will come in to fill that gap. Um, I think I also hope that at some point in time, the United States sees and recognizes the value of foreign aid. Unfortunately, people always thought we were like 10% of the government, government spending, or 10%, and we were like less than half of 1%, or, of what the GDP was. It was a very small fraction. We could do a lot with that small fraction. But there was a lot of misinformation. And the first time people heard about USAID may have been in its destruction. And there were a lot of misinformation, and there was a lot of, frankly, lies out there about what was happening and what we did and how we did it. The people who gave their lives to this were called criminals. We were personally attacked. And that really kind of, I think, breaks all of our hearts, that that's probably the first time someone, heard about USAID and heard about the people working there, was that they thought we were, you know, corrupt criminals who were, trying to do all sorts of crazy things around the world. And that wasn't the heart of the organization and what foreign aid brings, both overseas, but also to the United States. I mean, there were a lot of jobs on this side too that benefited from foreign aid. So, I do hope that there's a recognition, and that we can educate and we can spread that kind of information out there, and people start to understand the value of foreign aid, and that maybe we see like a rebirth sometime down the line, where we start to rebuild and start to kind of regenerate some of what we lost. Like we said, it's going to take a long time to get to where we were. Maybe it'll never look that way again, but maybe we can start to rebuild something that is able to kind of offer what USAID did.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears and back down here again, I hope what you're saying is correct. And I feel moved to say a phrase that's become very common here these days. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
You have had and will have a remarkable ministry. And I appreciate the time today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to hear a little bit more about like what we were doing and ask these questions, and hopefully others will look into it more and understand what we did and why we did it.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.